And welcome to BrightStreamTV. This is your host, William Everhart. And today we're going to be talking about my favorite topic in the world, Photoshop. In particular, we're going to do some compositing with Photoshop. And so let's dive right in. This particular course is going to be a little bit shorter than our normal 3-hour courses. We're going to try to keep this to about an hour, but really dive deep into one particular aspect of this particular application. So, compositing with Photoshop. Let's take a look. So today we want to talk about, well, of course, compositing with Photoshop, but we want to talk about the different compositing methods. So what is compositing and how do we go about doing it? Next, I want to try to identify some of the compositing challenges, some of the things that you're going to face when you're trying to merge images together here inside of Photoshop, and hopefully some ways that you can overcome those challenges. And then we'll move on to the demonstrations. My favorite part, where I actually get to work in Photoshop and show you all the wonderful things that it can do. So there you have it, really short and sweet this time around. We want to get right to work here inside of Photoshop, but before we do have a few things that we need to explain about what it is that we're doing when we are compositing in Photoshop. So basically the concept here is that I am trying to merge pixels. Now those pixels can come from different sources, and that's what we'll see here, or we can also sample pixels within the same photograph. So let's say we want to enhance a photograph by adding more content to it. So you're going to get to see samples of all of this today in the demonstrations. And I'm going to go through the rest of these slides as quickly as possible so we can get to those demonstrations. All right, well, let's dive back in, take a look at some of the different methods for compositing. All right, so the way I see it is there are 3 basic methods of compositing images in Photoshop. So what is compositing? Well, basically you are putting multiple images together. You are mixing pixels maybe from different images, okay? So one method of doing this is simply the removal of pixels. So in the little sample here you see, and I'm going to show you exactly how to do this, I have my model here, and that is one photograph, and it's laid on top of this background photograph, the wood back there in the back with the books. And so what we want to do is we want to remove the pixels around the model so that it looks like our model is in our environment. Now this is probably one of the more common compositing methods. Next, we have the aspect of actually blending pixels. Now this is really, really cool, but it's very limited. So here I have several photographs stacked together. And you can see that, well, there's bits and pieces missing here. It's almost like a little puzzle piece. But when we blend those pixels together, we get a really nice scene. And then finally, you have the ability to actually paint pixels. So instead of pulling over the entire image like the previous 2 samples there, now you're only pulling over parts of an image. And so in this case, and this is going to be very subtle in this particular photograph, notice that the canal has no traffic on it, but now we have a few boats in here. So to me, these are the 3 main compositing methods. I use these methods all the time when I am trying to pull content together within Photoshop. Now, which method you use, well, that really depends on what it is you're trying to achieve and the source material. So there's a lot of things you have to consider here, and really the best way to get into it is to actually just start doing it. Practice makes perfect. And that goes especially when we're dealing with Photoshop. So let's take a look at the first compositing method. All right, so the removal of pixels. So this is a strategic removal or hiding of pixels. So I'm going to mention that, hiding of the pixels. That's my method. I try not to erase pixels. I try to hide them instead, just in case I need to bring them back. So I'm going to show you some methods for that. But basically what we're trying to do here is we are stitching a couple of images together, and certain areas of the photograph are going to be removed or hidden from view. Now, how are we going to go about this? Well, of course, we're using Photoshop, but what are the tools in Photoshop that we're going to use? Well, we're going to rely on layer masks, the gradient tool, brush and eraser tools, and then also possibly a select and delete option. Now, the challenges. Well, with this type of thing, like most anything in Photoshop, if you dive into it too deep, it can be time consuming, especially if it's a complicated subject. So you really want to make sure that you know what you're doing, and that's why you're here, to learn how to do this. I'm going to show you a few quick ways, some methods that I use that will hopefully speed up your process. But the true test of this is to really just get in there and start playing with it and learning what you can and cannot get away with. Now, the last thing I'm going to make a point of here is that erasure of pixels is destructive. And it's very difficult to correct. This is another challenge, but I want to show you one possible method for getting over that particular challenge. So when I can, I avoid erasure, but I prefer the hiding of pixels rather than the deletion or erasure of pixels. So we're going to take a look at both methods and why we choose one over the other. Now, in method 2, we're going to blend pixels together. And this is the merging of the pixel color or the luminosity or both to create that nice unified look. Now, we saw this with the little fireworks thing, and that's the demo that we're going to use here. But in this case, we're going to be using, once again, layer masks and the gradient tool, but we're also going to be using the layer blend modes and layer transparency. The challenges of this particular type of method is it doesn't work in every scenario. It's actually pretty limited, but when it works, man, does it work. And it's really, really fast. It may require a little more time to find the exact blend mode that you need. Most of the time, though, you're going to rely on one of about 3 different blend modes to get it, and it works just about every time. Once again, you have to have the right type of imagery in place, and we'll talk about that during the demo. And then finally, painting pixels. And this is one of my favorite. It also happens to be one of the most time consuming, but it's just a lot of fun too. Here I am selectively adding groups of pixels to my overall composite here. So you can look at this as a way to enhance your photograph or maybe even correct your photograph, or like what we're going to be doing here, we're just adding content from various sources into our photograph. Now, the tools of the trade here, we're going to rely heavily on the clone stamp tool, the clone source panel, and then of course, layer masks. Challenges? Well, the challenges here are the resolution and size discrepancies, especially if we are sourcing our material from different images. You really got to pay attention to the resolution between your images. And then, of course, like anything else in Photoshop, it can be time consuming. And this really catches me a lot of the times, is that I really just dive into it and I'm trying to make it perfect. And it takes some practice to make it perfect. So it can be a bit time consuming. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an understanding of what it is we're trying to do when we are compositing in Photoshop. So we're stitching images or parts of images together to create a nice composite. Basically, you're just trying to change this image, enhance the image, however it is you want to look at that. Now, we can look at this from an e-learning standpoint, maybe like creating a background. You are stuck with maybe some stock photography that just doesn't really suit your needs. You get bits of one photograph and bits of another photograph, and it'd be great if you could put them together. Well, that's what compositing is all about. So let's dive into my favorite part of the show here, and that's the actual demonstration, because I get to work inside of Photoshop. Now, one other thing I'm going to point out here that's a little different for me than it may be for you is the fact that I'm going to be using a graphics tablet. In my case, as always, I'll be using my Wacom tablet, and this particular one is just the Bamboo. It's a really low-end model. It's low on the list there. Less than $100. You can pick up one of these. I won't work in Photoshop without one of these now. So you don't have to have it. You can certainly use your trusty mouse, but these are really awesome, and they're going to make it a lot easier for me to paint pixels in or paint them out. So it acts more like a paintbrush. All right, so once again, you don't need the Wacom tablet, or there are other manufacturers out there, but you don't absolutely need it, but if you can afford it, I highly recommend it. All right, well, let's dive into our first demonstration. Okay, so the first thing we want to do here is decide, what it is we're going to put together. What are we going to composite together? And I generally work from the bottom to the top. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, take a look over in the far right-hand corner of the screen. That is the layers panel. So as we pull these photographs together, we're going to rely heavily on the layers panel. And each photograph will have its own layer. And that's going to make it very easy for me to manipulate those objects on the individual layers. Because Photoshop is not like tools like Microsoft Word or Adobe Illustrator or any of these other vector-based tools out there. You can't select an object just by clicking on it in Photoshop. Photoshop doesn't deal with objects. It deals with pixels and groups of pixels. So we're going to keep our content separated by these layers over here. So this is my base photograph. This is the vast majority of the background that I want. I just need to add my model to this photograph. So how am I going to do that? In this case, what I want to do is simply incorporate the entire photograph of the model into this background. And then I will finish the composite here. So how are we going to get this in here? Well, one method is to simply go up to the File menu. I'm going to choose Place Embedded. Now you do have a Placed Linked. Now it does depend on which version of Photoshop you're using. The newer versions of Photoshop give you these two options. Others will just give you just a place command. There's no embedded or linked. Now what's the difference between the two? Well, embedded means it's actually going to physically copy the photograph and put it into this Photoshop document. So my original photograph will remain intact, okay? Place linked, well, that's just the opposite. It builds a link to that original photograph. So if that original photograph ever gets edited, well, guess what, folks? It's going to get updated and edited here inside of my composite as well. So I don't want that. I want to stick with the embedded. Alrighty. So the photograph that I'm looking for here, just drop into my lessons here, and this is Demo 1. And so I have my model here, and you can see this is just a nice stock photo here. We've got a model, and he's on a background here, and this is very common. What we want to do is have just the model, but drop the background. So we're going to place the entire photograph. Okay? We can scale him, move him around, those types of things. So I'm going to go ahead and move him around, place him over here, and I'm going to scale him up. And I want to scale him up to where he looks pretty close to the books. I'm using the books as a reference for size. All right. So that looks pretty good. I think I'm going to slide him over here just a little bit closer to the books, and we're good to go. I'm going to click on this check mark up here at the top to accept that transformation. Now I'm using the latest version of Photoshop CC, so when I place an embedded photograph like this, in this new version of Photoshop CC, it embeds it as what we call a smart object. And for our purposes, we don't necessarily need it as a smart object. So it's okay if it is, it's not a big deal. But I just wanted to point that out. These newer versions of Photoshop do embed as smart objects. All right, so what we need to do now is simply remove the background, that gray background from our model here. How do we do that? Well, we're going to hide pixels, hide or erase pixels. Now, I don't like to erase pixels, and the reason being is because you can run into a lot of trouble and maybe you erase too many pixels. Then how do you bring them back? So I try to avoid the eraser tools when I can. Now there are several eraser tools over here. So the standard eraser tool just does exactly as a pencil eraser does. It erases pixels permanently. Background and Magic Eraser, they add a little bit of selection to them. So a background eraser just allows me to click in a single area and erase everything that's that color. Now notice that in my case, I'm getting this cancel symbol for my mouse. These particular tools will not work with a smart object. So what am I going to do? Well, if I want to continue working with a smart object, I have to go a different method. I have to use what we call a layer mask. And what this does is actually hide pixels. So that's what I'm going to choose here. I'm going to use a layer mask. And if we have time, I'll come back to this and show you how to edit this so you can use the eraser tool as well. But for right now, what I want to do is be able to select this background and hide it. So to select this object, you've got a couple of options here. I could certainly use maybe something like a lasso tool or maybe one of my other selection tools here, but I think I'm going to use the Magic Wand for right now. Magic Wand's okay, I don't use it much anymore. It selects based on color, and we have a nice kind of gray background here, so this might work. I'm going to change the tolerance up here at the top, and I'm just going to click in this gray color here, and we'll see what we get. So when I click here, you can see that it did make a pretty good selection here. Now I need to continue adding to this selection. So up here at the top, I'm going to click on the Add mode here. Now it says every time I click with the Magic Wand, it's going to add the color that I'm sampling to my selection. So I'm just going to click right along here, and I'm just kind of following where the selection stops. And just kind of clicking, just adding these subtle color differences to my selection. Works pretty well. Let me get right inside of his arm here, click, there we go. And then what about right in here? Well, I probably should zoom in a little bit and click, boom. I'm going to zoom back out. And so now we have a pretty decent selection. The other choice that I have here is to go ahead and start hiding this, but if I hide it right now, if I hide those pixels, I'm going to get a little bit of a fringe. So I'm going to modify this selection ever so slightly. And I see I have a little bit more right up here at the top. There we go. What I'm going to do is go to the Select menu. And under the Select menu, I'm going to choose Modify, because I'm modifying my selection. I'm going to expand it. Now, I'm only going to expand it by about 2. Click OK. And so it basically just, well, bloated my selection. And it kind of etched into my model here ever so slightly. So let's see what we get. Now, how do we convert this into something where we can erase the background? Well, that's going to be a layer mask. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a trip right over here to the Layers panel. Here's my male model layer. And just for giggles, I'm going to duplicate that. So if I just grab that layer, I'm going to drag and drop it onto the new layer here. It's going to make a copy of it. I'm going to hide that copy for right now. We're going to come back to that in just a second. So I'm going to take my original layer here, and down here at the bottom there's this option that says add a layer mask. Now if I do that, watch what happens. So what is selected? The background. If I click on this, oops, it's hiding the male model here. That's not what I wanted. So I'm just going to undo this. A Control or Command Z will give me an undo. But I really want to use that feature. Does that mean I have to reselect this and select the male model? Absolutely not. What I'm going to do is another little shortcut here. Instead of just clicking on the Create Layer Mask button here at the bottom of the Layers panel, I'm going to hold down my Alt key, that'd be an Option key on a Mac, and click on that icon. And when I do, it will select the opposite. So it's hiding what I had selected. And there it is. It's very quick, very easy. The hardest part of this is actually making that selection. So, as I said, this is probably one of the more common compositing tasks. We're taking an entire image and laying it over another image and then hiding parts of this image that's on top to reveal the image underneath. And you'll see this a lot, especially in things like e-learning courses, PowerPoint presentations, where we're trying to put an object on a background. Now, in my case, it was a model onto an environment. This could also be, say, your product onto a background or an environment, any number of things. But like I said, this is very, very commonplace, is to create this type of composite. Now, there are further refinements that we can make. This particular one works out pretty well just because of the choices of the two images that I'm compositing together. But you may run into issues where maybe the lighting between the two photographs doesn't match. And that can be really difficult. The color between the two can be off. And so let's take a look at how we would handle those sorts of problems. So diving back into this photograph, I can see that, well, the lighting on the gentleman here, one, it's a little bit bright, but two, it's also a little bit white. The background here seems to be more of a warm environment. And so to really get this guy to look like he's in this environment, I really probably should, well, maybe I should brighten his suit up a little bit, maybe tone him down a little bit, and then definitely change the white balance on this particular photograph. The color of the light, that's the white balance. So let's deal with that. Now there's different ways to handle that. My personal method here may differ from yours, but what I'm going to use is a levels adjustment here. I'm going to click on the levels adjustment. And I want to restrict this adjustment to just my male model. To do that, when I apply this levels adjustment, I get a properties panel, and it shows me all the settings for this little guy. And then right here at the bottom, there's a little square with an arrow beside it. And what that's going to do is restrict it to the layer directly beneath it, which is my model. Now, the levels adjustment normally is going to lighten or darken the image. So if I grab this middle slider here, drag it to the right, it darkens the image. If I drag it to the left, kind of lightens the image, and it also kind of washes it out. So it's very rare that I use just that straight out of the box. Instead, what I'm really looking for is the color of the light. Now, there is a white point eyedropper here. There's these three little eyedroppers, and the one on the bottom is the white point. And what you want to do is to get a true white is just to click on a true white area, and that's going to balance that image for that particular color of light. It's going to make it white, but it doesn't have to be pure white. It could be a light gray or something. The same holds true for the black point. If you click on the darkest part of the image, it's going to set that as the darkest point and try to balance any color in there. So now it's completely neutral. I want to make it a little bit warmer. Okay? So now that I know that it's neutral, I can come up here and change any one of the individual red, green, blue channels. So if I choose the red channel and I start playing around with the sliders in there, you can see I can make my model green. He's starting to look a little alien here. See his face? That's because I'm adjusting the reds that are in that image. If I drag it back the other way, look, his suit's starting to turn a little purple and he's getting a little red there. So you could use the levels adjustment for this. You just go into the individual channels. You can certainly do that. I personally do it that way, but a lot of times people don't have that type of luxury, the amount of time that they need to do that. So let me show you just another quick method. If I go over here and I use something like a photo filter, okay, I'm going to click to apply a photo filter. It's different types of filters, so I can use like a warming filter, and that's what I'm going to choose here, one of the warming filters. I can also increase the density of that filter and just kind of warm this up a little bit more, starting to look pretty good. And then I can actually go ahead and limit this just to the male model. So now he's starting to look more like he's in this environment because I'm warming that photograph up. Great. Really quick, really simple. There are cooling filters as well, and then there's just regular color filters in here as well. So whatever method you choose, you're sure to find something here that's really neat. Like I said, I'm just wanting to warm up this particular model, so there you go. And that just kind of helps fit him into this environment. So the levels adjustment kind of neutralizes it. The levels adjustment will also allow me to do things like adjust the overall lightness and darkness of the image. So if I brighten it up a little bit, or I can darken it down a little bit. Really, really cool. It's just a great way to kind of help balance your photograph and get your model looking like he's in that particular environment. All right, so that's just a few of the challenges you may face when you're doing a simple composite like this, is getting the right light color and light amount between the two photographs. Now, I chose to adjust my male model. I could have just as easily adjusted the background as well. So it's more than just hiding the pixels. You're going to have to rely on some of those adjustments to get the colors and the tones just right. Okay, well, let's take a look at our next example here of hiding pixels. Okay, so in this example, I want to hide some more pixels, but I'm going to go about it in, I hope, a little bit easier method. In this case, I'm not going to have to make any selections, and that's wonderful, right? So what I have here is a nice scene here, and I'm just going to layer on some content. So I have this American flag here, and then I also have a bald eagle. Okay, so I think you can kind of see where this is going. I'm going to hide the eagle for just a moment, and I'm going to deal with this American flag. Now, the American flag and the eagle were put in here the same way that the male model was. It's place embedded. All right. Now, the flag here, really I want to be able to see the mountain range and stuff behind it. Okay, so what I want to do is have this flag appear here in the sky, and then as it gets towards the mountains here, I really just want it to fade out to reveal the bottom half of this photograph. So to do this, I am going to once again apply a layer mask to this particular layer, the American flag layer. So with it selected here in the layers panel, we simply go down to the bottom and add an empty layer mask. Whoops, I did it twice. So when you add an empty layer mask, what it's going to do here, let's see if I can make this a little bit easier for you to see with large thumbnails. It's going to add this large white box. So in a mask, white reveals. Basically, it's not hiding anything, but black hides. So a mask can only be black or white or any level of gray in between. So let me show you what I'm talking about. I have that mask selected here, and I can tell that because it has these little brackets around the little white box here in the layers panel. If I go over here and I use something like a paintbrush, okay, I'm going to grab my brush tool, and I am painting with pure black here. I want to make sure that it's pure black, okay? And I just start painting right here in the middle of the American flag. What's happening here? Well, it's hiding those pixels, okay? So I'm cutting a hole in it here, if you will. Now, if I paint with white, it's doing just the opposite. It's going to bring the flag back. It's revealing this object, whatever it is. All right? So what I want to do is I want to creatively hide some of these pixels, but I don't want to have to sit here and paint this out. No, that's going to take too long. What I'm going to do instead is use the gradient tool. Okay. So if I select the gradient tool and then I set my default colors here, white and black, okay, so the default foreground and background colors. The way this tool is going to work is it's going to start with whatever the foreground color is and then blend or fade, gradiate off to whatever the background color is. Okay? So if I start about the middle of the flag, I'm going to start here right here at the field of blue, and I'm going to click and hold, I'm going to drag straight down. Okay, now how far do I want to go down with it? Well, I'm going to stop here about the second stripe from the bottom and then release. And you see what happens? It's fading that off very, very quickly. Nice. Okay, if that's not enough, okay, maybe that's not quite enough. Let me try that again. I'm going to start a little higher, click, hold, and drag. And now that I can kind of see where the mountain range is, I can kind of see, where I want to have this thing completely fade away. Look at that. Isn't that nice? So already we've got a nice little composite here, and it really just took a few seconds. We put the images together, and then we throw a mask on it, and then we're using the gradient tool to edit that mask. Take a look over here in the layers panel. What's happening with that gradient? Well, it's starting with white, and then it's slowly fading to black. And by the time it gets to the solid black, well, then the flag is being hidden. Very, very cool. Next, we're going to expand on that with the bald eagle. So let me turn that layer on. So now in this case, we have this wonderful photograph of this bald eagle. It's just incredible if you zoom in on that and see all the details in here. It's great. It is on a nice, clean black background here. So what I want to do is to be able to remove that background. Okay. Several ways to do that. Once again, I try to hide pixels when I can. I didn't do this in the first with the male model, so I'm going to do it here. Instead of hiding those pixels, I'm going to delete them, okay? Just so I can show you what the problem is with deleting pixels. So first I need to make a selection, right? Because if I just grab my eraser tool, if I just come over here, grab my eraser tool, and I start hacking away at this, okay, and just start erasing on this layer, okay? Just start erasing away. Well, okay, I'm going to be here for a while. Okay, trying to erase all this out, and then I've got to trace around him, and ooh, what am I going to do with these feathers and stuff? It can be a little bit of a nightmare. So instead of just hacking away at it, erasing a little bit at a time, I could rely maybe on one of the other tools, maybe like the background eraser tool, or perhaps even the magic eraser tool. So I'm going to go with the magic eraser tool in this case. Now, what does this tool do? Well, it works a lot like the magic wand. In fact, it's like the eraser tool and the magic wand got together and had a child. Okay, this is their child. It will make a selection and then erase that selection. So what I want to do next is erase this black background. Now, the range of that black, because eventually that black is going to start turning to gray, which is going to be parts of the feathers, and I don't want that to disappear. So I want to be very careful with my tolerance. The tolerance is the range of the color that I'm erasing. So if I'm going to just click out here in the background here of the bald eagle where I know it's black, I'm going to just click, boom. Now that worked pretty well. It's not bad. The tolerance was reduced to 15 pixels. Now, what if I undo that? Control Z. And if I had left this at its default, which I believe is 32, and I click in that same spot, well, you can see we took away a little more here on the back, okay? So we just want to be mindful of that tolerance setting. The lower the tolerance setting, I'm going to set it really low this time, I'm going to set it to 2. And I'm going to click in this same spot and watch what happens here. You see, very little is removed. You see how it's kind of just blotchy now? That's perhaps too low, okay? So I'm just going to undo this a few times here. And I think we had a pretty good number there, around 15. So I'm going to set it at that, click to remove that, and that looks pretty good. We have a little bit here in the back we're going to clean up. But before I jump into cleaning that up, you see the bottom edge here is just cut off. How are we going to address that? We're going to do it the same way that we did here with the flag. Instead of trying to erase these pixels, we're going to hide them. So on this American Eagle or bald eagle layer here, I'm going to add a new layer mask. It's an empty layer mask, so it's not hiding anything. And then I'm going to grab that gradient tool once again, and I'm going to say, all right, so maybe from, I don't know, maybe from here, kind of down. I'm going to go slight angle here. I want it to fade off. Not too bad, but I still have a little bit here in the background, so I'll just click and drag again, try it again. There we go, not too bad. And I might want to clean this up a little bit. So I can just keep re-dragging till I get something that I like. Now, what's happening here is it keeps etching away at this photograph. It keeps adding to this particular gradient. The reason being is because of the mode that I had this in. So normally you're not going to have that same effect. Mine just kept adding to it because I'm in multiply mode. If I switch that to normal mode, I'm going to switch this back. Oops. Well, let's see if it'll let me do it here. Let me trash that and start over again. Let's delete that. Let's put a new one on here. Let's try that again. So now my gradient tool is in its normal mode. This is the way it normally operates. And if I click and drag, okay, that's all right, but I don't like it. If I click and drag again, it replaces it. You see how it brought these feathers in the front back? Let me try that again. I'm going to go from the back to the front here. All right, so I'm erasing. Whoops, that's definitely not what I want. What if I redraw this gradient? You see, it brought those pixels back. Awesome. All right, now, what about cleaning up this edge here a little bit? So remember, I erased these pixels, okay? I need to erase a few more of them, but I also may need to bring some of them back. Okay, well, I'm going to use the mask for this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my paintbrush, and I am going to paint with black. Now, if I start painting with black, what's happening? It's erasing those pixels, right? Well, you know, that might work here, might not. Honestly, I think you'd be a better choice to maybe make a selection and then go in and modify that selection. That's why I don't like erasing pixels. So what if I wanted to bring some of these pixels back? Maybe I wanted to bring back some of that area there. Well, there's a little tool up here at the top, and this is in your basic loadout here, your workspace, the Essentials workspace. It's part of that, and it's called the History panel. Now, the History panel will keep track of the last 20 things that you have done. In my case, I've got it cranked up a little higher, so it's keeping more than 20. But check this out. At any point, I can go back to the original image here. So if I have a source, and that's this little paintbrush with the circle on it here. There's a little arrow on the paintbrush. It's set to the original how this document started, okay? Now I can set it to any point I want in here, okay? But I have it set to the original. So let's see what we get. You have to use a special tool for this. There is an art or a history brush. There's also an art history brush, which does something completely different, but there's a history brush. And notice how its icon matches the icon up here in the history panel. So what this does is paint back into history. So if I select this layer here, and let's say I wanted to bring back some of these pixels, and I start painting, look what's happening here. Now what is it doing? It's painting to the blue sky. It's actually hiding that image in the background. It's hiding part of the American flag because it's painting back to that point in history. So not the best choice for this particular area here, but that is one of the things that you can do. If you choose to erase pixels, you can bring them back. All right. So just making these selections can be a little tough. Cleaning them up, kind of depends. So what else can we do here? Really not a whole lot. Like I said, that's why I don't like erasing pixels. I like to hide them instead, okay? Now I can go in here if I want to. We'll go back in here a little bit. And I can choose a different type of brush. So you have all kinds of brushes in here. Maybe choose one of these textured brushes because the feathers here are really, well, they're just kind of random, okay? But if I paint with a textured brush, grab one of these little textures here. I want one that's a little bit looser, okay? But if I go in here and I start painting, I can start, and I'm going to paint on the mask here so that I'm actually hiding some of this content. You see, I can kind of fake this a little bit, and because it's a random brush, it gives me kind of a random edge. And so I can kind of fake it. Now, right here along his bill, I wouldn't want to do that. On his beak, I should say, not his bill. But I wouldn't want to do that there because that is a little bit smoother surface. But anything that's kind of fuzzy like this, you can try one of these little brushes here to kind of randomize that edge a little bit. And I'm just kind of rushing through this for this particular exercise because we only have a limited amount of time. But that's probably what you have as well, a very limited amount of time in which you can spend on creating one of these items. So you just kind of paint in along the edge here. Very cool. This is also where a Wacom tablet, or a Wacom, I should say, I should pronounce it correctly, a Wacom tablet comes in very handy because I can turn on things like pressure sensitivity for this. And so now, the lighter I press on this, the less it hides, the less it works. So if I press really hard, I'm erasing pretty much everything. But if I press very lightly, you see I can kind of leave a little bit of it in there. Very, very cool. Very cool. All right, so there you go. This is what I say, you can spend a lot of time in a photograph like this, especially with all those feather details. Once again, my preferred method here is to hide those pixels. I think you're going to get a lot more options when it comes to hiding and then revealing pixels rather than erasing them. So try that on for size. Try the mask on for size. I think you're going to be a lot happier than just simply blindly erasing those pixels. All right, well, that's hiding or removing pixels. What are some of the other methods? What about blending pixels together? Let's take a look at the next demonstration. All right, so once again, I've built these files for you so that when you start off with them, the fireworks in this case are already embedded into the photograph here. So you don't have to do that part if you want to follow along with these exercises. But remember, you just simply go to the File menu and then Place Embedded. And that'll go ahead and bring them in here. So what I have is my base layer here, which is the skyline of downtown Charlotte, which is where we're based. And then I have several photographs of fireworks. Now I'm going to turn off that background photo for a moment so you can see. Now, each of these firework photos, it has, a black background because it was shot at night. So that's the nighttime sky. So it's almost pure black, okay? So all of those photographs are basically the same thing. They're a nice, clean, almost black background, okay? So we're going to use that to our advantage. When I turn these things on, the black background is hiding the objects underneath, okay? So what we want to do is get rid of that. We don't want that happening. We got to get rid of the black in each of those fireworks photos. Now you remember the bald eagle, the detail that was in that, right? What about this? What if you had to go in here and selectively hide the black pixels in these fireworks? Oh my goodness, you'd be here for years. So instead of trying to hide those pixels in a normal way with maybe an eraser tool or a mask, what if we just blend those pixels away? Now this is really cool. Like I said, it only works in certain scenarios. Now the scenario that we have here, we have a nice dark skyline, and then these photographs, the part that we don't want, well, it's dark too. So what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to change the blend mode of these photographs here. So I'm selecting just the layers with the fireworks, not the background layer. Okay? And then I'm going to go right up here to the top of the layers panel. There is a drop-down menu here that says normal. That's the normal blend mode, and I'm going to change it. Now there's all types of blend modes, so which one do I choose? Well, the thing I'm looking for is this one. It's called lighter color. So what it says is that I'm going to keep the lighter color and everything else gets tossed. Look at that. Just like that, we've got fireworks over the city. Amazing, right? Well, we still have some challenges here. What if, like in this case, some of my little streamers from this red firework, well, they're touching the buildings here, and I really want this to appear as though those fireworks are behind the buildings, okay? So how do we deal with something like that, okay? I can't really put that firework behind the building in the layer stack over here. I mean, if I put the buildings in front of the firework, well, you see it covers up the firework. So what I want to do here is, once again, use a mask. But now, I may have to mask out other fireworks as well, you know, where they touch the buildings here. So what I'll do is, to make that a little bit easier process, I'm going to group all of my fireworks together. So with the fireworks layers selected over here in the layers panel, I'm going to click this drop down, and I'm going to choose to group these layers. So new group from layers, okay? I'm going to call it, whoops, not fireworks, how about fireworks? Okay. Now, that makes it a little bit easier for me to mask all of these fireworks at the same time. Probably the best way to do this is to actually kind of trace around the buildings, because we have nice flat, straight lines in the buildings. So you could use your pen tool, you could use you know, a polygonal lasso tool, whatever method works for you to make a selection and then mask it. To save time here, I've actually done that for you. So once I have my fireworks group over here, I'm going to go up to the Select menu, and I'm going to load a selection. Okay. In here, there is a channel called Skyline, and I'm going to go ahead and choose that and tell it to load that as a selection. We can see the marching ants, and the marching ants are around the sky itself. Next, we simply select the layer, the fireworks layer here, and we apply a group, a layer mask to that group. So if I click on this layer mask option, it's going to basically mask those fireworks to that shape. Let me show you what I mean. There's a small little icon right here. It's a little chain. And if I break that chain, and then I were to actually go in here and maybe move one of these fireworks. So I'm going to take that red firework. And what should happen now is, if I move this firework near that building, it doesn't matter. You see, it's staying behind this building. That's that mask working for me. So this allows me to then go in and manipulate the fireworks. Maybe I want to move them around, do whatever it is I want to do. Okay? But I had to, disable that mask, the link between the mask and the group. If I didn't do that, then the mask would move with the individual objects, and we don't really want that. We want the mask to stay still and let those objects be moved independently. So, blending pixels together. That's just one method. Really, really cool, especially when you have images that have similar backgrounds, or maybe an extremely light background or an extremely dark background. This could work also with, say, the models. Let's say you buy some stock photography and they're on white backgrounds or black backgrounds. This particular method could possibly work for you. There are other blend modes in there. Certainly try those on for size, but traditionally we're looking for those lighter or darker blend modes. And like I said, it really works in this particular case, but it is very limited. All right, so that's the blending of pixels, blending those layers together, changing that blend mode. You can get some really, really amazing results with that. All right. Well, let's take a look at the final method here, and that's actually painting pixels in. So we've hidden pixels, we've blended pixels. Now what about just plain old painting pixels? All right. So for this demo, I'm going to try to keep this one as simple as possible. I have a truck here that has some pumpkins on it. Okay. So this is not bad, but maybe I want to add more pumpkins, maybe here in front of the truck. I feel like I don't have enough pumpkins here. We want to add some more. Now, I could go to another photograph and add pumpkins in here, but I've got a whole truckload of pumpkins. Let's just repurpose those. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to just zoom in here a little bit so we can see this. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to sample some of these pumpkins and I'm going to duplicate them down here on the ground. Before I do that though, I want to work in a non-destructive method. So I'm going to go over here to the Layers panel. And to the bottom of the Layers panel, I'm going to click on the New Layer icon to create a new layer. Okay? So now if I add something to this layer, it doesn't permanently alter the photograph that I already have. Next, I'm going to go over and grab the Clone Stamp tool. Okay? This is kind of like an interactive copy and paste. Okay? Now, if you're going to work with the Clone Stamp tool, a lot of times we use this for image repair. So what I want to do here is just modify it ever so slightly. So if I want to work with this tool, I really should have the Clone Source panel because it controls the way this particular tool behaves. I'm going to go up to the window menu. I'm going to come down here where it says Clone Source. So the Clone Source allows me to do things like scale and rotate what it is that I'm cloning. So not only just copy and paste, but also scale it while I'm pasting it. Pretty cool. So first let's make a sample. I want to sample some of these pumpkins here on the back of the truck. So I'm going to hold down my Alt key. That'd be an Option key on a Mac. And while I'm using this Clone Stamp tool, holding the Alt key or Option key turns it into basically an eyedropper. It's going to sample pixels. So I get this little crosshair here, and I'm just going to sample this bottom row of pumpkins here. I'm going to start right here with this little pumpkin. I'm going to click right in the middle of that little pumpkin there. I'm going to release my Alt or Option key, and I'm going to mouse down here to where I want to start painting it. Now, in order for me to see what it is I'm going to paint, I need to increase the size of the brush. So I'm going to use the right bracket key, and I'm just going to hold that down. It's going to make my brush really, really large. Now notice what's happening here. I don't see anything. Nothing's happening. Why is that? Well, let's take a look up here at the very top in the Clone Source tool options. Okay, all these options up here at the top. One, I think I'm going to turn on this option. That's going to enable my Wacom tablet here, and this one too. And so it's going to allow me to adjust opacity and brush size based on the pressure of my tablet. If you don't have a tablet, don't worry about it. But this is the option I'm looking for, Current Layer. So it can only sample the current layer I'm working on, which is Layer 1, and there's nothing on Layer 1. So I'm going to change that option, Current and Below. All right, now when I have it, oh, look at there, I suddenly have pumpkins. The other option that is turned on by default and is going to be really handy here is this little option right here, and it is the Aligned option. It is going to keep the pumpkins aligned. So when I start painting, it is going to basically copy these pumpkins, put them where I want them, and it's going to remember that spatial positioning there. Next, I'm going to increase the size of these pumpkins because honestly, I don't think those are big enough. See, it's a little further back in the photograph, and if I make them a little larger, they'll actually look like they're closer to me. So I'm going to increase that to about 125. And so you can see, if I move my brush closer to the original pumpkin here, my new pumpkin is, well, it's about 125% larger. Okay? I'm trying to see if you can see it. It's a little bit larger there. Okay, so now we should be able to see it. See how my pumpkin in my brush there that I'm moving around is about 25% larger. Perfect. Okay, so my brush here in this case is a round brush. You could certainly use other brush shapes. You could certainly use some of these pixelated brushes, these kind of random brushes. I'm going to choose in this case just a soft round brush. And the softness I have actually I'm going to set this up to a very hard edge, and I'm adjusting that using that right bracket key. So Shift right bracket will adjust it, and I'm going to push it all the way to 100% hardness, and I'm going to back off of it about 2 levels. All right, now it's just a matter of start painting. So where do I want it? Well, I want it to start right here, and I'm just going to start painting some pumpkins. Da, 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 da. We get bunches and bunches of pumpkins here. All right, now how many pumpkins do I want? Well, I'm going to just put a whole grove of them right here, and I'm not too worried about them going over the other pumpkins in front because I'm going to fix that. Now that I have these pumpkins in place, I want to fix it. So now I'm going to come back in here, and this is where erasing pixels is probably okay. Let me paint just a few more in here. There we go. Now I'll switch tools to my regular eraser tool, and now I can start erasing because I'm erasing this duplicate layer here, this layer 1. And so I'm just going to start etching away here. Just painting away the content that I don't want. And in this case, it worked out really well because the top of these pumpkins had this nice cornfield right behind it, and that almost exactly blends in with the grass here. So in my case, I got really lucky with this. It worked out great, but you know, it's not always going to work that way for you. It's not always going to be perfect. I wish I could tell you that it would, but it won't. So you just have to know what's the best method. And that is really just from experience. So I'm just erasing some of these pumpkins here. Bring this little guy back right in front. Drop this down. He's got a little knob right there. There we go. And now I can kind of switch back and forth. Now, here at the bottom of these pumpkins here, let me get this one out. This one's just kind of driving me nuts here too. Get a few more of these out. Nice, nice. Okay, so it's starting to get a little believable here, but right here along the bottom, okay, I can switch back to my clone stamp, and notice how it remembers the positioning. That's that align option. So I missed some of the pumpkins here on the end, so I can just come in here and I can start painting that in. Okay, cool. Paint a little more in. Perfect. And then I can switch back to that eraser tool and just take out what I don't want. Now here is where the pressure sensitivity comes in really, really handy. Now if you don't have pressure sensitive, that's fine. You can just lower the opacity of your eraser. That way when it does erase, it's not completely erasing it. It's just partially erasing it. So I'm going to lower that. Because I do have a tablet here, I'm going to set it to my highest, like 75% is the maximum I want to go. I'm still going to use my tablet pressure to determine how much it erases. So very lightly brushing against it, it barely takes any of that away. But now what I can do is I can just hug it up really close, because we do want the idea of some shadows here, but not maybe as much as what we have. If I scrub a little harder, I can erase more. Okay. I'm going to increase the size of my brush so I can go a little bit faster with this, but I'm just kind of barely touching the tablet here because I want to blend this in. Okay. So just erasing these pixels here. I'm just going to kind of go in here a little bit. I can also switch this brush to get one of these more kind of scattered brushes because it is grass after all, so maybe that would help a little bit. And if I erase over this, it almost looks like some of the grass is in front of the pumpkins and just kind of helps sell the idea that these pumpkins are actually sitting here. So this is what I mean. This is where you can really just spend a ton of time trying to modify this. The big thing here is just get in here and practice as much as possible so that you can learn all these little tips and tricks and see what works and what doesn't work for you. Just going to kind of bring some of this out here like so, and then I am going to zoom out There we go. And so it's not bad. Now the other thing that I have happening here is that these look, once again, the color is a little bit off, the lighting is a little bit off, but they're in the same photograph. How is that? Well, probably because of where the sunlight was. These pumpkins here in the front are maybe not as vivid. Maybe they're in a little bit brighter area. The sun is hitting these, but these back here are getting protected from the sun a little bit, just because of their positioning. So what I'll do, once again, is just maybe apply like a levels adjustment here, maybe brighten it up just a touch, and I'm gonna lock it just to this one layer. So I'll do that, and then the other thing is more of an atmospheric condition type of thing. For this, I'm gonna use saturation. These pumpkins seem a little too orange, so I'm just gonna reduce the saturation on those a little bit. And that just kind of helps sell the idea. Typically, you run into that when things are further off in the distance. If you look at, say, the flag back here in the background, maybe the grass back here in the background, one, it's a little bit blurred, but then there's also the further back you go, the more atmosphere between you and what you're seeing there. So this stuff tends to be a little less saturated. Now I know that seems a little weird in this particular case, but that was really due to the lighting here. So I just want to desaturate these a little bit. And once again, I'm going to lock that to just those pumpkins right there in the front. Nice. Flip back up just a touch. So just trying to balance out the color between what I copied and where I painted it. All right, so that is painting pixels in. Now, in this case, I sampled the pixels from the same photograph. And a lot of people will say, well, that's not really painting pixels. You're just, copying and replacing pixels. Well, yeah, that's really all we're doing here. But we're doing it very selectively, very targeted adjustment here. So a really, really cool way to be able to, in this case, modify my photograph, make it look like I have a lot more pumpkins than I really do have. Now, I want to take just a few moments to show you the canal photograph. So bear with me here just a moment. It's a very similar technique, but in this case, I want to show you how to do it when the boats are not in the same photograph. Let's take a look. All right, so this one is probably the end-all be-all here. I'm not going to go too crazy with this because we just don't have the time, but the concept is the same. I want to add some boats to this photograph, but I don't have any boats in the photograph. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open another image here. And I have a photograph here with some boats, okay? So now it's just a matter of picking the boats that I want to use. Now here you want to be careful. I'm going to very carefully target this little boat here in the center. So what I want to do is I want to grab my clone stamp tool, okay? And my clone stamp still sees the little pumpkins. See that? If I open this up, it still sees that pumpkins because it still remembers that sample point. But I'm in a completely different photograph. So we're going to use that to our advantage. I'm going to hold down the Alt key, it's Option key on a Mac, and I'm going to click right here on the bow of this little boat here, right in the center of the photograph. I'm going to click on that one. Now the reason I'm choosing that because it has a nice clean edge here on the side. I have water here and I have a reflection. I want that. So I'm going to sample this particular boat, and we'll come back and we'll sample another boat. But this is the one I want for now, so I've got it sampled. Now I need to go back to the other photograph. So I have to leave this photo open. Now, while I'm here, in fact, I'll do it now. While I'm here, I'm going to open up the clone source panel. Notice that the clone source panel has 5 different little stamps across the top. This is how it remembered the pumpkins from the earlier sample. So that's sample 1. If I click on sample 2, I can sample again. Now I can sample from the same photograph or a different one. So I'm going to sample from this photograph. I'm going to grab, let's get this boat right here. Okay? And maybe I'll open another photograph. And I'm going to sample some lily pads. But I'm setting different sample sources across the top of my source, clone source panel. I'll jump back over to my photograph where I want to paint these elements. And depending on which source I choose, I get different options. So my first source is the boat. Second source is the other boat. Third source, the little lily pads. Isn't that cool? Now, they are tremendously large compared. This would be like a big sailing ship here, but it's not. It should be a small boat. So that's just a matter of changing the sizing here. And what I like to do is I'll grab and highlight the width here. And then on my keyboard, I'm going to use the down arrow key, and I'm just going to hold it down to scale this boat down till I think it's the proper scale where I'm going to use it in this particular photograph. And that looks about right to me. So I'm about half of what it was. Very, very cool. Next, I'm going to reduce the size of my brush. So to do that, I'm going to have to get out of here. Reduce the size of my brush, and now let's take a look. Yeah, it's pretty close. I might have to go a little bit further. Maybe I'll just move the boat up here a little closer. Okay, so I'm just going to start painting my boat here. So I'm going to paint him, start painting him in, and I'll just paint in his reflection, just like so. Now, if I keep painting with this, you see it's painting that entire photograph. That's not what I want. So, just once again, go over here and grab my eraser tool, and I can start erasing the parts that I don't want. Okay? But that's really amazing that I can paint from a completely separate photograph. I can paint into this one. Now, where is this really handy? Well, exactly like what I'm doing here. I'm going to turn this off. When I have parts of a photograph that I need, I don't want the whole photograph. I just want a few boats. It's going to make this process a lot easier. So I don't need the entire marina there. I just need bits and pieces of it. This particular technique works really, really well. I can sample the other photograph, but I have to keep the photograph open. If I close it, then that sample source is gone. So I just open up all of my sources, I sample each one of those using the different samples in that clone source panel, and then I go back to my main image where I want to composite them together, and I can select from the different sample sources and start painting those pixels. So that's it for this particular episode, and I hope that gives you some indication as to just some of the things that you can do when it comes to compositing multiple images together inside of Photoshop. So if you like this and you want to learn more, well, stay tuned. We're going to have more episodes on how to use Photoshop in different ways. We're going to start taking a deeper dive into these applications. Just like this, the compositing. We'll have other things that are very common tasks and some that are maybe not so common that people really have a lot of questions about. Well, how do I do this? And so you're going to see more of that right here on BrightStreamTV. I'm William Everhart, and I want to say thank you once again for joining us, and I hope to see you again right here on BrightStreamTV.